one question I'd like to answer, I guess, right out of the gate is why Edge Reflow? Why are we going to go to this program and use it? Well, some of you already know that, and that's why you're taking this course most likely, but I wanted to give you an overview of the workflow, I guess, generic workflow that we have, and some of the issues and some of the challenges that we have with responsive design. Think of it this way. Let me go over to Photoshop. I've got a bunch of stuff open here. In Photoshop Forever and a Day, or Illustrator, or Fireworks, whatever it happened to be, your tool of choice, we would go in and we would do things like slice. Now, I'm going to do a horrible job with this, but we go to do things like slice things out. We'd save for web and devices, whatever it was called, and we'd get the images out, and we'd start to put those into some kind of editor to create our website, and there we go. Now, the issue with this is that, well, if we have a Photoshop file, Illustrator, Fireworks, whatever you use, and you want to get sign-off from a client, that's great. Okay, and back in the day, what we used to do is just send this to the client as a PDF or something, and they would look at it and say, okay, well, that's what it's going to look like on a desktop. Great, let's sign it off and build the thing. Now with responsive design, we've got a lot more to think about. We have to consider if we are going to go, first of all, responsive, okay, and if that's part of the project, then we have to consider, well, what is the site going to look like, let's say, on mobile devices or on other devices? So having a static design in Photoshop can be tricky because you show this to a client, they sign off on it, but this is only one part of the story. You're only seeing what it's going to look like in desktop, for instance. So what a lot of people are starting to do is they're starting to create multiple, let's say, Photoshop files or Illustrator files. They'll create a mobile version. They'll create a tablet version. They'll create a desktop version, which still doesn't tell the whole story, but at least gets you closer. There's one company I talked with, that said that they created something like 14 or 15 different Photoshop files for each web page just to give the idea or to tell the story to the client, and the client was internal. So we're looking for other ways to do this. Some people are going with what are called style tiles, and there's a lot of other stuff we can do. Some people are starting to actually just dive into code and actually design in code. So you're creating a web page, you're setting up what are called media queries, which we've already talked about a bit, and you're just going at it and maybe creating some of the content in Photoshop, Illustrator. But by content, I mean, let's say, buttons, logos, things of that nature. But this is kind of rough. For those of us who don't want to jump in and hand code, let's say, and want a more visual way to do this, this is where Edge Reflow steps in. Edge Reflow allows us to take our Photoshop design, and you can see right here, it takes all the content from the Photoshop design and allows you to import it into Reflow, in a couple ways that can happen, and make it so that you can start your responsive design from the design in Photoshop. And that's why we have Edge Reflow. It's a very visual tool. And just to show you, I've got tons of applications here, but I'm going to crack it open, and you're going to see that in Edge Reflow, in the workspace, we actually have this great little handle over here, the ability to change the viewable width here, if you will. So pretend that we are in a mobile device and, we're roughly 480, something like that, on a newer iPhone, for instance. We could say that, well, this is the viewable area, and a lot of us will call that the viewport, and we can design to match that. But in Edge Reflow, we can visually then go to, let's say, the next break, when the design's going to break. We can figure out, okay, in the viewport, if the viewport's larger, what's the design going to look like? And this is all done visually. It's going to spit out code the other end, but you are working on a visual interface here to get this done, to create a responsive design. And all the tools are something that you're relatively familiar with. There are going to be some terms and things like that we're going to talk about in the next lesson next week, where we talk about, padding, margin, all these web terms that you're going to need to know. But this is one of the reasons why we're opting to use Edge Reflow, or at least go into it and take a look at it. Now that we've covered some of the background information and we've talked just briefly about Edge Reflow and kind of where it fits in, what we're going to do is we're going to jump into Photoshop and start to, I guess you could say, finish a design for a site that is going to be what's called mobile first, which we've talked about, and just show you some of the things in Photoshop we need to think about as far as Edge Reflow is concerned.